They say marriage is built on trust. But what happens when the one person you rely on is secretly poisoning your mind? I never thought I'd end up faking a complete mental breakdown just to prove my wife was messing with my medication. I'm Eric, 32, and if you told me a few years ago that my wife would be the person trying to drug me into submission, I'd have laughed in your face. I've always been the sarcastic, somewhat cynical type who keeps his shit together, even when life throws crap at me. So let's dive into the story. Before the whole nightmare began, my life with Lisa felt solid. We met at a friend's birthday when I was 28, hit it off instantly, and ended up moving in together 6 months later. By the time we married, I was 30, convinced I'd found my partner in crime and that everything else would fall into place. Work was demanding but manageable, and our apartment was cozy. I'd never been a poster child for mental health, sure, but I'd handled stress fine with coffee and late-night gaming sessions. Anxiety was something I read about online or saw in movies, not something I expected to own a prescription for. Then, 2 years into our marriage, after what I assumed was just a brutal quarter at my marketing firm, the fog hit me. It started subtly, like taking a slow elevator ride down in my head until I was looking through thick glass. My thoughts lost their edges, details blurred, and I began skipping tasks I knew how to do blindfolded. I'd sit at my desk for hours, staring at an empty email draft, fingers hovering but unwilling to type. Nights became a slog. I'd wake up feeling like I'd never slept at all. Days felt like rehearsals for an unending performance where I forgot my lines constantly. I told Lisa about it. She squeezed my hand over dinner and said it would pass, probably stress-related. 2 weeks later, with no improvement, I finally went to a doctor. The verdict, moderate anxiety disorder. Medication was the next step. I swallowed the first pill, thankful for a concrete solution. For a few weeks, I felt nearly normal again. The haze lifted, I started accomplishing tasks, and the heavy weight on my chest eased. I joked with coworkers that I'd been the poster boy for functional anxiety until the meds kicked in. Lisa beamed like she'd saved the day. That calm was fleeting. Around month 3, I noticed a handful of odd things. My pill bottle seemed lighter than it should, even though I was taking the exact prescribed dose. Sometimes, I'd find a few pills on the counter, away from the bottle. Other days, the cap was unscrewed when I knew I'd put it back. When I mentioned it, Lisa rolled her eyes and said I was probably misplacing them. She'd brush it off with that casual, "you worry too much" tone that, in retrospect, was the final red flag I missed. I wanted to believe her. I really did. The idea that my wife was fucking with my medication sounded insane, outlandish. But every time I swallowed a pill, I felt more spaced out than before. Worse, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was like eating a candy I knew tasted sweet, but instead delivered the dull, numbing flavor of chalk. My brain was slipping back into molasses mode, but now with awkward tremors that made my hands shake while I tried to text. I questioned everything. Was this anxiety relapse or something darker? My mind buzzed with doubt, and I hated it. I hated not being sure of reality. My behavior changed. I became quieter, more withdrawn. Friends asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was under work pressure. I didn't want to explain that I suspected the person I trusted most was sabotaging me. One morning, I sat on the bathroom floor scanning the scattered pills. My head pounded like a warped metronome, and I thought, maybe I really am losing it. The fear of being labeled mentally unstable crushed me more than the symptoms themselves. So I tucked the bottle back and pretended I was fine. As days rolled on, Lisa slipped into a quiet control routine. She curated my diet, insisting I needed clean eating to help my anxiety, though I'd never had issues before meds. She chose supplements she found online that she said were better for folks like me. I went along, too frazzled to fight. Unbeknownst to me, she rewrote my life script. 5 meals a day, early bedtimes, no caffeine. On paper, it sounded healthy, but in reality, it made me dependent on her to tell me what to eat, when to sleep, and whether I could even grab a coffee without a lecture. My autonomy vanished under the guise of concern. The turning point came on a quiet Tuesday. I arrived home later than usual from work, exhausted. In the kitchen, Lisa was cooking quinoa and tofu, her expression calm. I reached for my pill bottle, but she gently took it from me, saying, "Let me handle that. You'll thank me." Something inside snapped. The doubt that had been simmering boiled over into furious certainty. I snatched the bottle back, unscrewed it, and slammed it on the counter. Pills spilled everywhere. "Stop," I said, voice harsher than I intended. "What the hell are you doing with my meds?" She pulled that serene smile, the one that used to make me feel safe. "You need them to help with anxiety," she said softly. "Trust me. Trust me." The words echoed like a taunt. I looked at her, really looked. In that moment, I saw the flicker of something triumphant in her eyes. It wasn't love, it was power. I realized I couldn't trust her at all. My hands shook as I grabbed a handful of pills and left the room. For the next week, I obsessed over the pills. I researched testing kits, found a lab that could analyze their contents, and paid out of pocket. Each night, I lay awake, heart pounding, waiting for the results. When the call finally came, I felt a cold rush in my veins. They confirmed it. The pills were a mild sedative, not my prescription. Enough to make me compliant, but not enough to spark an alarm if a doctor tested me. I hadn't been losing my mind. I'd been manipulated. After the lab results confirmed the pills weren't mine, I felt a mix of rage and relief that tasted equally bitter. Rage because someone had been fucking with my brain. Relief because I knew I wasn't losing my mind. But knowing and proving were two very different beasts. First, I had to get more evidence without tipping Lisa off. She was already suspicious of my odd behavior, and if she realized I knew, she'd bury the truth deeper. So I bought a discreet pill testing kit online and set it up in our tiny bathroom. One evening, when she was out meeting her mom's group for coffee, I crushed a couple of her sedatives from her own medicine cabinet and tested them as a control. Sure enough, they showed the same compounds that the lab had found in my supposed prescription. It felt like catching a snake in the act of striking. With the kit next to the sink and my hands shaking, I dumped a handful of what I thought were my pills into the kit's tube. The colors changed instantly, confirming my fear. This was sabotage. My blood ran cold. I took a breath, wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans, and dumped everything back into the bottle to avoid suspicion. There was no way to hide how my hands had trembled, and if she asked, I'd blame the steroid cycle I'd started at the gym this spring. Better a lie about muscles than letting on that I was onto her. That night, I dreamed I was inches from her face, shouting, "Why the fuck would you do this to me?" But I woke up paralyzed by the fear of the actual conversation. Instead, I logged onto my laptop and hid a folder called Proof behind 3 layers of encryption. Paranoia was on a roll. Soon I'd expect her to hack into my brain as well. The next challenge was confronting her without giving away how much I knew. I decided to bait her. Over dinner, I casually mentioned an article I'd read about medication tampering. Crazy, right? Could you imagine if someone experimented on you without your knowledge? I watched her eyes flicker for a split second, something unguarded, like guilt or anticipation. Then she tilted her head, the perfect picture of concern. That would be awful. But seriously, you okay? You seem on edge lately. I smiled and shook my head. Just reading weird shit online. Figured I'd share. I tossed the conversation like a well-practiced actor hiding stakes. She bought it. She always did. It wasn't enough. I needed a direct admission or at least an incriminating slip. So I recorded every interaction on my phone, hidden in my pocket. At first, her words were innocuous, small talk about chores or our weekend plans. But I waited for her to mention my meds. Weeks passed without a peep. Then, one afternoon as I fumbled with my pills in the kitchen, she froze and stared at me. A flicker of impatience crossed her face. "Let me see that," she said. Without thinking, I handed her the bottle. She opened it calmly, took out 2 pills, and tossed them back after a slow look. "I'd maybe switch them for something milder, ease you into it," she mumbled as if thinking aloud, guilt laced with her habitual control-freak tone. My heart thudded. Her mom's words echoed in my memory. "This worked on your father, too." That phrase repeated in my head like a broken record. I didn't say anything. I just let it sink in and kept recording. Now I had the admission. I couldn't let the moment slip away. That night, I orchestrated another bait. A fake argument over something trivial, a burnt dinner or a weird expense. When our voices got louder, I slammed the table and whispered loud enough for the mic to catch. "You know what's fucked up? Your little trick with my meds. Don't act like you're the victim here." Then I stormed out, pretending to go to the basement. My heart pounded, waiting to see if she'd chase me. Of course, she didn't, but I'd planted the seed. The inner conflict hit hard. I was terrified that if I moved too aggressively, I'd play into her hands. She could claim I'd gone off my meds, discrediting everything. I felt like I was walking a tightrope strung over a pit of wolves. One wrong move, and I'd either lose my case, or worse, end up committed under her control. I needed a bold plan to shift the balance of power. That's when the idea struck. I would fake a complete mental breakdown in front of friends and family. Act insane so convincingly that everyone would think I'd relapsed horribly. It would buy me time to secure a lawyer and file official tampering allegations. Reckless? Absolutely. Risky? Through the roof. But the sedative she'd been slipping me was dulling my ability to fight back, so I had to shake up the routine with guerrilla tactics. I started rehearsing my meltdown in secret, pacing the hallway at night, talking gibberish, slamming doors, slurring words. I even pulled out notes from an old acting class to perfect the uncontrolled sobs and convulsions. To anyone watching, it had to look organic, the raw unraveling of a man who'd finally snapped. I labeled these rehearsals Operation Meltdown on my phone, which made me laugh at how absurdly on the nose it was, given the irony. Every step escalated the conflict, remaining covert while building undeniable proof, constantly on edge that Lisa might sense my game. I was juggling two identities, the paranoid husband uncovering a crime and the deranged patient convincing everyone that cures had failed. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and every moment I spent pretending to lose my mind was also another moment she could strike back. The real breaking point wasn't the test results or the baited slips. It was the moment I decided to weaponize my own sanity against her. And that choice set the stage for everything that would follow. The week after I baited Lisa into that offhand confession, I felt equal parts terrified and exhilarated. I had proof she was tampering with my medication, but now I needed to gather every scrap of evidence without tipping her off. I treated our home like a crime scene, mapping hidden corners and planning my moves. Every encounter with her became a minefield. One misstep could send me to the hospital or worse, a psychiatric ward. First on the agenda was recording. I clipped a small digital recorder inside a hollowed-out paperback on the living room shelf. From there, it captured almost every sound. TV noise, her humming, and most importantly, our conversations. I watched her carefully, waiting for another slip. It wasn't always exciting. Often, it was her asking me about work or commenting on dinner plans. But I left the recorder running 24 hours a day, hoping for gold. Each night, I transferred the audio files to a hidden folder on my laptop, encrypting them under a fake music album title. Meanwhile, I was monitoring my pills like a hawk. I refilled my prescription at the pharmacy myself now, insisting on signing for it directly. The pharmacist gave me a sympathetic nod when I mentioned anxiety, but I knew none of them understood the real story. I kept detailed notes in a leather notebook labeled Health Log to keep up appearances. Every dosage, every reaction, every time I felt a tingle of sedation. It read like the diary of someone spiraling out of control, which was exactly the cover I needed. Next, I had to verify pharmacy records. I called customer service as a private patient requesting records of every fill, refill, and return. The rep was polite, the automated hold music murderous, but eventually I got the spreadsheet. When I compared episode dates, like that Tuesday I found the bottle open, to my refill history, the mismatches jumped out. Someone had returned pills at odd times. I highlighted those discrepancies in red ink. Seeing the pattern made me sick and furious. I emailed the document to my hidden legal folder with the subject line receipts. Emotionally, I was a wreck. Every night, I rehearsed Operation Meltdown, pacing the hallway until my legs ached. I practiced slurred speech in the bathroom mirror and timed my fake heart-thumping panic attacks. My chest tightened as I ran through the performance. I even Googled videos of seizures to emulate small tremors. It felt absurd, acting out a breakdown in the same house where my real mind had been under siege. The irony didn't escape me. I was pretending to unravel while meticulously keeping myself together. Friends started asking if I was okay. I told them I'd had a relapse, and they rallied around me. They brought casseroles, sent sympathetic texts, and paused awkwardly when I slurred my words. Every reaction was a confirmation that my act was working. But it also hurt, because these were people I genuinely loved. Manipulating their concern felt like stabbing them in the back. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the window and almost believed I was actually losing it. That panic almost made me call the whole plan off. But then I remembered being told I was imagining things, and that memory fueled my resolve. Meanwhile, Lisa maintained her perfect caregiver routine. She hovered in the kitchen, offered herbal teas she claimed would settle my nerves, and suggested evening walks that conveniently coincided with her mother's schedule. Karen popped up more often, always with an unsettling calmness. She'd pat my arm and murmur about legacy tricks that work, in such a casual way I almost laughed at how normal it sounded coming from her. I kept that audio recorded for the day I would play it in court. As evidence piled up, I arranged a meeting with a lawyer specializing in domestic abuse. I laid out my binder of pharmacy records, recordings of Lisa's admission, and my health log with dosage notes. The lawyer's eyes went wide when he heard the details. He warned that proving intentional tampering was tough, but with recordings and expert testimony on dosage effects, we stood a chance. He agreed to draft a complaint for medication interference and to subpoena pharmacy records directly. Hearing someone say, "This is textbook coercive control," made me feel a grim victory. At home, I had to keep playing the fool. One evening, I deliberately spilled a glass of water on my shirt during dinner, wiped it off, and mumbled about my clumsy hands. Lisa jumped up with napkins, asking if I was sure I wasn't going to pass out. I nodded, unable to meet her eyes. Later, when I checked the recorder, her voice was there, cooing, "Poor thing, you'll be fine once you get rest." Beneath the concern, though, I heard triumph. She thought she still held the cards. The final piece fell into place when our mutual friend Sarah, who'd visited weeks earlier, emailed me asking why I'd been acting so weird. She wondered if I might have drunk too much at my birthday party. I drafted a believable explanation about stress drinking gone wrong, then casually asked if Sarah noticed Lisa hovering around with pills or offering me unknown supplements. Sarah replied, "Now that you mention it, yeah, she slipped something into your drink and said it would calm you down." That offhand remark was gold. I added it to my evidence folder and printed out the email. That evening, I slipped the official court summons onto the kitchen counter, nicely served, per the rules, then left for a late jog to time my return. When I came back, the envelope was torn open. I found Lisa in the hallway, pale and trembling, her defenses gone. She stared at the notice like it was a grenade labeled, "Your life," and whispered, You're suing me?" Her voice cracked, the calm mask shattered at last. She sank against the wall, eyes wide, the gravity of her own nightmare finally hitting her. That moment sealed the shift. Whatever happened next would play out in a courtroom, and she knew it. The day of the trial, the judge called the session to order, and suddenly the air felt electric. Every eye in the room was on Lisa, perfectly coiffed, face schooled into that serene mask she always wore. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod to her lawyer. I tried not to smirk. It looked ridiculous. The prosecutor began by laying out the basics: unauthorized medication tampering, coercive control, and emotional abuse. My lawyer handed over a stack of printouts, pharmacy refill logs, my detailed health diary, witness emails, and transcripts of Karen's incriminating slip. The court clerk flicked through them with disinterest. I leaned forward in my chair, heart hammering. This was the moment all those weeks of rehearsed panic and secret recordings would pay off. First up, the pharmacy expert testified. He explained normal prescription procedures, chain of custody, and how my logs showed discrepancies. He pointed to the marked dates where pills had been returned without authorization. The defense lawyer sneered, suggesting I'd faked the records. I caught Lisa's eye then, and her calm facade cracked for a split second. I felt a surge of triumph. My journal entries, which she assumed would brand me as unreliable, instead proved meticulous record-keeping evidence, not mania. Next, the audio recordings were played. I watched Lisa's expression darken as her own voice echoed through the courtroom, admitting she switched my medication and mentioning, "It worked on your father." The judge paused the playback when Karen's line about her father came through. Lisa's lawyer objected, claiming I had tampered with the evidence. The judge overruled, calling the recordings authentic and admissible. My lawyer gave me a brief nod. That nod felt like a silent, "I told you so." Then came my turn. I walked to the stand with my best, nervous PTSD survivor stance, shoulders slightly hunched, hands trembling just enough to look real. The defense lawyer launched into a barrage of questions designed to paint me as unstable. "Mr. Eric, haven't you admitted that you sometimes forget where you are? That you've responded to voices in your head?" I bit my tongue, fighting the urge to say, defined voices in my head. Instead, I nodded and offered a single line. I've experienced side effects from my prescribed medication. That's why I documented everything. Dry as dust and oddly satisfying. The defense tried to roll out expert testimony from a psychiatrist they hired to declare me mentally unfit. He solemnly opined that my behavior could be consistent with severe anxiety or a personality disorder. I almost laughed out loud at how perfect this was, proof that she'd succeeded in creating exactly the scenario she wanted. My lawyer stood, pointed at the witness, and asked one question. "Doctor, are you aware that your patient's medication was secretly replaced with a sedative for months?" The psychiatrist faltered. His answers became hesitant. He mouthed, "No." Then I wasn't informed. End of his credibility. As the trial progressed, I saw Lisa lean forward, nostrils flaring. Her attorney tried a final card, an insanity defense. They had her pretend to zone out, whisper answers, and twitch her leg. Moments of "she can't be held responsible." They wanted to argue. But the prosecution had prepared video footage of her the week before. Calm, collected, organizing our kitchen cabinets. The prosecutor played the clip. In it, Lisa spoke clearly about meal plans and supplement schedules. The contrast was laughable. The judge asked the jury to ignore theatrics and focus on facts. Then came the moment Karen was called to the stand. I watched the older woman stroll in, expression unreadable. Under oath, she gave polished answers until my lawyer asked her about advising Lisa. At first, she denied involvement. Then emails from her account popped up, sent on family plan group chats, detailing tried and true methods for keeping him compliant. Her face went white. When the prosecutor asked if she ever confessed to administering sedatives to her husband, her voice cracked as she mumbled, "I may have mentioned it once." That qualified admission was all we needed. By the time closing arguments rolled around, the courtroom was practically alive with tension. The prosecution laid it out, a calculated abuse of trust, documented evidence, and a family legacy of manipulation. The defense begged for sympathy, calling it a misguided attempt to help by two loving women. I stared at Lisa, loving my ass. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Sitting there in that silent room, I felt disconnected from my body, like I was watching a movie of my own life. When the foreperson finally handed the verdict to the bailiff, every second felt stretched. We, the jury, find the defendant, Lisa Thompson, guilty on all counts. The words hit me like a punch. I exhaled, a laugh slipping out before I could stop it. In that moment, I felt equal parts relief and sorrow. She lost everything. Our home, my trust, her reputation, and a chance at redemption. As the judge announced sentencing, I quietly gathered my notes and evidence. Lisa's mother wept softly in the gallery. Lisa herself sat, head bowed, silent. And me? I stood there wondering how someone could smile and then destroy you, all under the guise of love. When the gavel finally fell, I realized that winning this case wasn't a victory so much as a reckoning. The conflict here was blunt and final. Expose the truth or remain under her control forever. I chose truth, even if it broke my heart in the process. After the proceedings, reporters swarmed Lisa and me. I answered a single question. I just want to move on. I mean it. Moving on meant more than freedom from her. It meant untangling the remnants of my life she'd rewired. The courtroom showdown had stripped away every lie. The mask Lisa wore had shattered, revealing the rot beneath. And for the first time in years, my mind was truly my own. Walking out of the courthouse felt like stepping into sunlight after living months in a basement. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and a friend threw an arm around my shoulder, murmuring, "You okay?" I nodded, though inside I felt hollow. Winning felt less like a victory and more like opening one door only to find a dozen more waiting behind it. The real challenge wasn't proving her betrayal. It was piecing myself back together. My first test came at bedtime. I stopped taking any medication for 10 days, certain that even one more pill could be a trap. Each night, I lay in the dark with my heart pounding and thoughts ricocheting like a pinball. Where was the fog? Why wasn't it here to shield me from pain? Instead of sedation, I experienced the raw edge of reality. Every betrayal, every sleepless hour, every moment I doubted myself slammed into my mind like waves. It was brutal but honest. I finally understood that the haze had been a two-part assault, her sedatives and my smashed confidence. Now, With no pills to dull me, I confronted the unedited version of myself. To rebuild trust in anything, I had to start fresh. I sold the house we'd shared, split our joint accounts, and moved into a small studio with only a mattress, a couch, and a lamp that flickered ominously at night. My routines, meal plans, bedtime rituals, coffee runs, had all been controlled by her design. Now I made new ones: groceries on Sundays, morning runs at dawn, and cooking whatever I felt like, even if it was cereal. I double-checked every lock on the door and installed a second deadbolt. My phone buzzed with messages, but I delayed replying, wary that immediacy could be another form of manipulation. Trust had been weaponized against me, so I weaponized caution. Therapy became my anchor. In the first session, I sobbed for 30 minutes before I could form a sentence. Between ragged breaths, I managed a dark joke. So my wife turned me into a lab rat, and now we're hashing it out over tissues? My therapist didn't laugh. She just handed me another box of Kleenex. Over the weeks, I learned the language from my experience: gaslighting, coercive control, and medication sabotage. Naming the abuse felt like shining a light on a dark corner. Each session left me exhausted and somehow stronger. I realized healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about rewriting my story with facts, not lies. A month later, I took a terrifying step. I announced a support group for people who'd faced covert medical abuse. I posted a simple message on a local community board, expecting nothing. Instead, my inbox filled with stories: partners slipping pills into drinks, parents dosing children, even bosses using sedatives to stifle workplace complaints. We met weekly in a rented church basement, sharing our stories and passing around mugs of lukewarm coffee. Each confession chipped away at isolation. I no longer felt like a freak. I was part of a community that understood the horror of betrayal by someone you trusted completely. Legal fees devoured half of my settlement, and I sold my car to cover the rest. For weeks, I rode the bus to work, gripping a coffee cup like a lifeline. Each stop reminded me of freedom's price: inconvenience. But I welcomed it. It felt better than being under someone's thumb. Over time, I saved enough to buy a modest used car: manual transmission, no power locks, no hidden surprises. Every payment stung, but the vehicle was mine and mine alone. Reactions from friends were a mixed bag. Some disappeared, telling me my story sounded too Hollywood to be real. It stung that people who lectured about mental health compassion could so readily dismiss my truth. Others showed up with casseroles and affection, admitting they'd thought my breakdown was a genuine relapse. I confronted them gently, teaching them not to equate sensational headlines with personal reality. Each conversation tested my resolve, but I emerged more convinced that education, not silence, was the antidote to disbelief. Returning to the office was like re-entering a battlefield. I negotiated a gradual comeback: part-time weeks, then full-time. My boss greeted me with a tentative handshake, eyes flicking to my face as if measuring for tremors. I kept explanations brief. Personal stuff. I'm fine now. I stopped making jokes about meds or mental health. Humor felt cheap. Instead, I focused on deliverables and deadlines. Week by week, my confidence grew. When colleagues praised my dedication, I shrugged and muttered under my breath: "Survived a covert poisoning scheme. This is a cakewalk." The idea of romance terrified me. Trusting someone new seemed impossible. But therapy urged small steps. I agreed to a low-pressure blind date at a local coffee shop. I arrived early, nerves buzzing. I shared a concise version of my ordeal: no graphic details, just the facts. Instead of recoiling, my date listened with steady eye contact. When I paused, she said, "You survived that. That's incredible." For the first time in months, I felt seen and believed. Vulnerability felt risky, but it also felt human. 6 months after the verdict, life was still fragile, but it carried promise. Each morning, I woke and chose a simple routine: work, therapy, support group, dinner, sleep. No pills altering my perception, no hidden agendas. Those mundane, predictable steps became my quiet rebellion. I knew healing wasn't about dramatic epiphanies. It was about small, consistent decisions reclaimed for myself. Sometimes I read news of manipulative schemes and think of Lisa and her mother, wondering if they'll ever learn. Probably not. They'll move on to their next con. But that no longer scares me. I know the playbook now. I know how the game is played and how to survive it or stop it. The scars remain, tightness in my chest, the reflex to double-check locks, the lingering wariness when someone offers pills. But those scars are proof that I'm alive, awake, and determined to own my mind and my choices.